So wish you all a very good evening, and thank you to IMA and to DigiShield for creating such a wonderful platform for all of us to share our knowledge with the primary care physicians who are listening to us today. Uh, I bring to you greetings from my institute called the Pulmocare Research and Education Foundation, which is situated in the city of Pune here. I'm going to be largely talking about the importance of masks, why are they so important in this current pandemic, which masks are important, and who should wear which mask. I believe that a large number of doctors also do not know much about masks. They wear the masks that they probably get hold of without understanding which mask is necessary or important for them. And so is the case with the lay people as well. Everybody seems to be wearing a mask which they think it works. But by and large, I think a lot of people are wearing the wrong mask for the wrong reason. And I thought that this presentation, I would cover all these important topics. Let me take you through, let me take, oh, I don't know, why can't I proceed? Is there any specific reason why this is, oh, I'm so sorry. The last slide first. Okay. Let me take you through time in the year 1903. And what you could see over here is an operation theater where you could see the surgeon who is operating on the patient. There is an assistant surgeon standing next to him. There are assistant nurses who are helping the surgeon in the operation. On the backdrop is an amphitheater where all the students of surgery and medicine are looking at how the surgeon is operating. The surgeon is operating upon a patient and is also teaching the students at the same time. Now, there are two very important things that I would like you to observe in this photograph of 1903. One, none of these surgeons are wearing a mask. And second, none of the surgeons are wearing gloves. Because at that point of time, it was not important, it was not known why is it important to wear a mask and why was it important to wear surgical gloves. It was an observation that created a very exciting story. And before I tell you about this exciting story, I'm sure all of you all have gone to a cinema theater. And when you see the ray of light coming from behind, which projects the image on the screen, you'll see these tiny particles along the ray of light. So when you have a ray of light, it actually allows you to see a lot of particles, which otherwise you would not be able to see. You take a torch in the night and you'll also see the particles in the air. It was one of those days where the surgery was going on. The surgeon was teaching the students, and one of the students happened to make a comment because he found something very interesting. I was told by a student in a large medical college in Chicago, she writes, and I'm going to tell you who this she is, it's a very important person, that he had often noticed during surgery when the light was from a certain direction, he could see from his seat in the amphitheater a continuous spray of saliva coming from the mouth of the surgeon while he talked to the class and conducted his operation. Shouldn't protection of the mouth of some sort as to catch the droplets of sputum, shouldn't that be a routine precaution for surgeons during operation? Was an observation and a question that a medical student made and asked this question to the teacher, who was a very important person called Alice Hamilton. Alice Hamilton was a very, very bright physician. She was the first lady professor of the University of Harvard. And she heard this story from the young doctor. And she said, this is very interesting. Perhaps the surgeon, when he's talking, when he's operating upon the patient, he is probably releasing a lot of bacteria from his mouth. And she said, let me experiment with this. So she got the surgeon. She went to the same operation theater, but instead of keeping a patient on the operation theater, she kept a mannequin. And on top of the mannequin, she kept these culture plates, microbial culture plates. so that when the patient was talking, if there are any bacteria present in his oral cavity, they would come out as droplets and they would be caught on the culture plate that was right in front of him. And she would then be able to find out whether they carry infective bacteria. And then she did a very good experiment, a very thorough study out of this. And she said that during routine surgery, a surgeon speaks around 500 words. And during this routine surgery that he talks, on an average, 75 bacterial colonies were identified on the culture plate, which contained various pathogenic bacteria like streptococci, staphylococci, and so on. She also went on to show that antiseptic mouthwashes were of no use. So a surgeon who took antiseptic mouthwash and performed this surgery, and she again kept the culture plates, there was absolutely no difference in the number of bacterial colonies that she could grow. She also went on to show that talking released droplets that traveled up to 24 centimeters, that is 2 feet, while if you're coughing, then the droplets reach a distance of around 3 feet, 36 centimeters. And more interestingly, there were more droplets produced when you whisper something rather than when you talk something. And then she made this very interesting statement that the mouth of the operating surgeon is a fruitful source of bacterial infection, even after usual precautions of disinfection. And then she went on to make a recommendation that all surgeons and nurses should have their mouth protected during the time of the surgery so that the bacteria do not spread to the operation site where it can cause infection. Very interesting story in 1905. However, the recommendation that she made was not followed by everybody, was not very popular until a story happened in 1927. This was at the Presbyterian Hospital in New York. And this was published in a very famous journal called Journal of American Medical Association. A series of severe hemolytic streptococci were identified in these patients who were operated upon. And because a lot of these cases started coming more frequently, and everybody was worried, why are we getting these so many wound infections, surgical wound infections in the recent past? So because of the story of Alice Hamilton, somebody said, why don't we take a throat swab of all the doctors and the nurses to see if they are carrying this pathogenic strain of streptococcus. And to their surprise, they were able to show that 30 the surgical staff harbored the hemolytic streptococci in their throats, and many of them carried them in the nose as well. So all this infection was actually transmitted by the surgeons when they were operating upon these patients because they were not wearing a mask. And because of this one episode in 1927, there was a very strict advisory, not only in the United States, but all over the world, that all surgeons and nurses and other operating staff members must wear a mask during surgery. And I thought this is a very interesting story that tells you why do the surgeons actually wear a mask? The surgeons wear a mask not to protect themselves, but the surgeons wear a mask to protect their patient from the patient catching the infection when the surgeon is talking during the surgery. So wearing a mask actually protects the patient from catching the infection. So from masks to protecting the patients to masks to protecting yourself is also a very interesting story that I thought I should share with you. This was way back in 1910 when there was this famous pneumonic plague in Manchuria in China. 50,000 people died almost at that time. And this was not transmitted by the rats or the fleas, but by airborne droplets because of this animal over here called marmot, a very popular animal in the city of Manchurian. And the fur is very popular. So a lot of these animals were actually killed to take the fur. And because there was a lot of meat available, they started eating this meat. And this meat actually was the source of the plague. And then the transmission happened through droplets. Now, there was this young Malaysian-born doctor who had studied at the Cambridge University. And he was made in charge of this plague in the city of Manchurian. And he believed that by protecting himself, by wearing a gauze mask or a surgical gauze mask that the surgeons were using in the UK at that time, would protect him from catching the infection himself. Now, this is what he recommended to all the doctors and nurses and the paramedics and even the burial assistants, that if you do not want to catch this plague infection, you must wear this plague mask made up of surgical gauze, 2 layers of surgical gauze. Uh, that was perhaps the first time ever that there was a recommendation to wear a mask to protect yourself from catching the infection. There's a history that goes along with this that says that there was a Britisher who came to Manchurian to see how a plague is managed, and he saw this doctor wearing a plague mask, and he said, "You look so funny. You look like a thief to me. Why are you wearing this funny-looking mask?" And the doctor said, "This is to protect myself from the plague." And he said that the doctor said that even you should wear it if you want to protect yourself. At which the British doctor actually laughed at him and said, "How can you protect yourself by wearing a mask?" So he did not wear a mask. And then history tells us that the British doctor who came actually caught the pneumonic plague and died because of it. So that was the beginning of the history of wearing a mask to protect yourself from getting infected from others. And then subsequently, there was a series of very interesting experiments that took place to find out what kind of mask should you wear. Should you wear a gauze mask? If at all you should wear a gauze mask, should you have a coarse gauze mask or a fine gauze mask, 1 layer, 2 layers? Which one protects you the most from catching the infection? So this is a study again published in the Journal of American Medical Association way back in 1918. Here you can see a coarse gauze, a photograph of that. So you can see the number of threads are very small. And what they did was very interesting. They had this patient who was asked to cough for 5 minutes. And then at a distance of around 1 feet and 2 feet and 3 feet and 4 feet, they kept these culture plates. Not only at various distances from the source of the cough, but they also added the number of layers of the coarse gauze. So 2 layers of the coarse gauze, 3 layers of the coarse gauze, and so on. They wanted to find out whether increasing the number of layers of gauze reduces the risk of catching the infection, or whether increasing the distance from the source of the infection reduces the risk of catching the infection. Believe me, this is an experiment that they did in 1918. And here you can see the number of colonies of bacteria. So if you're just 1 feet away from the person who coughs and you have only a 2-layer gauze, you can see a large number of colonies of bacteria over here. As you increase the distance and as you increase the number of gauzes, you can see that the number of bacteria become less and less. So this was with the coarse gauze. When you have a little more finer gauze, which is a medium gauze, you can appreciate that the number of bacterial colonies reduced significantly as compared to the coarse gauze. So what does it mean? A medium-sized gauze offers more protection than a coarse gauze. And then finally, if you take a very fine coarse gauze, and that is a buttercloth gauze, you can see that even with just 2 layers, no matter how close are you to the person who coughs, you can protect yourself because there are absolutely no bacterial colonies that were identified over here. So this was the first experiment to suggest that if you want to protect yourself from, especially from bacteria, you need to have a very fine cloth material, something like a butter cloth, because that is the one that prevents the entry of the bacteria into the respiratory tract. 1918 is recognized as the world's second greatest pandemic, called as the Spanish flu pandemic. More than 500 million people were infected and 15 million people died. It was caused by an H1N1 influenza virus, and many people believe that it originated from China and then spread across to the rest of the world, where it created more havoc, exactly like the COVID-19 pandemic, where you look at the numbers of people who got infected in China, far less as compared to the number of people who got infected in Europe and in the United States. What had happened was the World War I had just ended. A lot of people had died in the First World War. There were 40 million people who died. And so these people, these soldiers were returning from the war to their homes. Many of them caught the infection, the flu infection on the way, and died. And because of this double whammy of soldiers dying and the flu pandemic also killing people, many countries did not disclose this to the people at large. They kept it as a secret. The only country that did not keep it as a secret was Spain, because Spain was a war neutral country. So they had not lost any soldiers, but they were losing a lot of people because of the flu pandemic. And so they were the only ones who were reporting that pandemic. And people believe that Spain was the only country that had this terrible flu pandemic. Actually, all the countries had, but the countries actually hid all their numbers. Mostly young people died because of the cytokine storm. And just like what we are seeing today, poverty, overcrowding, secondary bacterial infections were all the causes of death at that point of time. Now, the reason why I'm telling you about the Spanish flu story is the county of San Francisco did something very different to reduce the burden of suffering and the deaths associated with the flu. On the 24th of October 1918, the mayor of San Francisco actually put forth an ordinance saying that every single individual residing in the county of San Francisco must wear a mask, because they believed that the mask protected people from catching the flu. So strict was it that if you do not wear a mask and if you are found by the police, you'll be fined anywhere between $5 to $100 at that point of time, or even 10 days of imprisonment. So it was so very strictly implemented, this ordinance that was brought by the mayor in San Francisco. This was an advertisement that was put forth in the San Francisco Chronicle, which is a popular newspaper in San Francisco at that point of time. And it was the Red Cross who put this advertisement. And if you look at that wording of the advertisement, it says a gauze mask is 99% proof against influenza. So if you wear the mask, you will be protected 99% of the time. And it says wear a mask and it will be very useful for you. Sold for 5 cents in the year 1918. When the Red Cross started selling them, they were sold like hotcakes. By the afternoon of the 25th, about 5,000 masks were sold, and they had to get additional masks to give it out to people. Such big was the response that the Red Cross do not have any more masks, and then they recommended the people at home to make their own masks. I'm telling you the story because history repeats itself. What they found in 1918 is exactly what we are finding in 2020, and I'm going to show you how history has repeated itself in this current scenario as well. So these were the Red Cross people who were selling the masks. You can see that they themselves are wearing the mask. Here is a nurse who is taking care of a patient suffering with flu. The policeman who ensured that everybody in the roads were wearing masks. Even the rich woman wore a mask. And then, the spray, you can see the man's spraying some chemical with the belief that the virus would be killed that is present in the air. Lockdowns, quarantines, social distancing, compulsory masks were very important and common words that were used in the year 1918. San Francisco became a very successful county in the United States, the most successful county in the United States, to save the most number of people from catching the infection, as well as the number of deaths. So the mayor of San Francisco very proudly disclosed at the end of the pandemic that we reduced the number of deaths and the number of people catching the infection only because we made sure that everybody wore a mask in our county. Why is this important? Because this is exactly what we need to do in today's time as well. Hearing the story of the mask, there's a big ship that sailed from New York to Southampton. And so this is again at the time of the Spanish flu pandemic. A lot of people actually caught the flu infection during this journey from US to UK. And the captain of the ship was very worried that there were hundreds of people who fell sick, and it was a tough time for him to manage all these cases during the journey. And then he had to return back from Southampton to New York. And this time, he said, I'm going to do something different. Having heard the success story of the San Francisco County, the captain of the ship ordered something very interesting. He said, every single passenger who is sitting on the ship must wear a mask. It was made compulsory. You know how many people got the infection during the return journey? Zero. That was the impact of wearing a mask during that long journey from Southampton to New York. The reason why I'm telling you that story is there's a very similar story that has been reported from Wuhan in China. There was this young man who did not know that he was suffering from the COVID-19 infection. He was traveling from Wuhan to his home village. And for that, he had to change two buses. The first bus was a big luxury bus. So traveling from point A to point B, he did not know that he was suffering from COVID-19. From point B to point C, which is his village, he traveled by a small minibus. But the only thing that he did different was when he got down at point B, he bought a mask from the bus station and wore the mask during the journey from point B to point C. The reason why I'm telling you this is, retrospectively, when people examined, because when he was corona positive, they went to all the people who traveled in the same bus. They tested all the people for corona, and from point A to point B, 5 people were found to have caught the infection from this man. And from point B to point C, not a single person caught this infection. Most likely because he wore a mask during that journey from point B to point C. There is another very interesting story just reported very, very recently, a few days ago. A person traveling from China to Toronto, Canada by flight. And during that entire journey, he wore a mask. Little did he know that he was actually an asymptomatic carrier of the COVID-19 virus. As soon as he reached Canada, the next day he started feeling ill, got fever. And because he came from China, he was tested for the coronavirus and he was found to be COVID-19 positive. Now, when the moment that happened, the airline got into their act, and all the passengers and all the other people who were traveling on that flight, they were all invited to come back, and they were all tested if they caught the infection from this one passenger who turned out to be positive. Surprisingly, none of them actually turned out to be positive. Perhaps because he wore a mask during that entire journey. This is what most people believe. I'm sure you must have heard about this story in the United States in Los Angeles, where at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, people were still very casual, and despite warnings of wearing a mask and social distancing, there was this one group in the church who refused to wear a mask, although they had some little bit of social distancing. But they said, God is going to protect us from catching this infection, and we are going to sing for the God. So out of the 60 people who were there in the singing choir, 45 people actually caught the infection. 2 of them at least actually died because of COVID-19. Why? None of them were coughing or sneezing during the singing. It was the singing that was releasing all these droplets into the air that was transmitting the infection to everybody else. There's a very nice video that I wanted to share with you that is published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm just trying to see how I can go back to my sharing the slides. Okay, I can't do that, but they took a laser light and asked a person to say, "Stay healthy." So I'm saying that word, "Stay healthy," and you could see a spray of droplets coming out of that person's mouth using a laser light. Then they put a surgical mask, and then they uttered the same word, "Stay healthy," and you could see no droplets coming out of the person's mouth because it was shielded by the mask. So this is a very nice visual impression of the power of wearing a mask to protect other people from catching the infection because of talking. A lot of countries have been using a mask inherently. I mean, they use a mask every day, whether there's a pandemic or there's no pandemic. Countries like Hong Kong, go to Korea, go to Singapore, everybody over there is wearing a mask. It's a part of the culture. They believe that wearing a mask is important to protect everybody else from catching their own infection. Uh, and then if you look at the numbers of people who actually suffered from the COVID-19, these countries where there is a culture of wearing a mask regularly, they are the ones who had the least amount of infection in their country. And compare that with those countries where masks are not used at all. United States, United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, Germany, they don't have a culture of wearing a mask at all. And you can see the numbers over here that tell you how many of them actually caught the infection. So these numbers also tell you a story that if everybody wears a mask in the community, the the chances of transmission become very, very less. The only message I want to convey through this slide is 80% of people who have this infection are asymptomatic, yet they are transmitting the infection. They don't need to cough, they don't need to sneeze. A simple act like talking also generates a large number of aerosol droplets, and this is what transmits the infection. So the WHO recommendation that only the sick people who have symptoms should wear a mask, I think that was not a very good recommendation, although the WHO has now changed the recommendation. Everybody should wear a mask because who knows, you may be an asymptomatic person who is transmitting the virus to the other people. Uh, Here is a very interesting mathematical modeling exercise done by the university, one of the universities in the United States. Uh, you can see over here the y-axis is the daily deaths, the number of people who die because of COVID-19, so 2,000, 4,000, and so on. On the x-axis is the proportion of people who wear a mask in the community. So this is 20%. Out of 100 people in the community, only 1/5 people wear a mask. Is that going to have an impact on the number of people who die because of COVID infection? And you can see over here that not wearing a mask at all, which is the topmost curve over here, to this curve over here, which is wearing a mask that is at least 50% effective, even a simple cloth mask. Uh, even if 20% of the people wear it, you can reduce the number of people dying from around 7,000 to around 4,500. So that's a significant impact, even if 20% of the people wear a mask. If 50% of the people wear a mask, you can cut down the number of deaths due to COVID-19 by around 50%. That is how impactful is wearing a mask. And if 80% of the people wear a mask in the community, and if you really strictly ensure that everybody wears a mask when you're outside, 80% people wear a mask, you can get rid of the COVID-19 disease within no time. You can reduce the deaths to almost 0% if you wear a mask. And this is all mathematical modeling exercises done by this university using very, very complicated statistics. So the authors actually recommend that here is the evidence to support that if you wear a mask on a regular basis, many people wear a mask on a regular basis, you can kill the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's the message. There's another paper that I'm not going to go into the depths of that. Similar mathematical modeling done in other universities also seem to suggest the same thing, that if many people wear a mask, you're going to reduce the burden of COVID-19 significantly. So what are the types of masks that you know? You know that the surgical mask is a triple layered mask. It's got an outer layer, which is hydrophobic, that prevents the liquid from entering inside your face. Then you have a middle layer, which is made up of melt blown fiber. And then an inner layer, which is an absorbent that absorbs the moisture of your breath. All the three layers are very important. The reason why I'm sharing this with you is look at the images of this woven fabric on the left versus the non-woven fabric on the right. And it seems that the woven fabric have a little more holes inside them compared to the non-woven fabric, because the non-woven fabric is tied together so closely that there is hardly anything that can pass through that. So the filtering capacity of a non-woven fabric seems to be better than a woven fabric. And that's what surgical masks are made up of. And therefore, they're the ones that have good filtration against bacteria and viruses. I'm sure all of you have heard about the N95 mask. Do you know what N stands for? Do you know what 95 stands for? I'm sure 9 out of 10 people do not even know what is the meaning of an N95 mask. Well, this is a classification that is given by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. It's a government organization present in the United States. And this organization is a certifying body for the masks. Just like we have, a film certifying body that certifies the film as A for adults, U for universal, and PG for parental guidance. Somebody has actually certifies the film that these are the people who can watch the film. Similarly, the NIOSH is the body that actually certifies the masks and recommends that the N type of filter should be worn by whom, R type of filter should be worn by whom, and P type of filter should be worn by whom. So let me take you through this in a very simple manner. N series, R series, and P series. Now these series are classically based on the ability to filter off oily aerosols. So if you're working in an industry where there are a lot of oil aerosols that are generated, such as in sealants and lubricants and coolants, you need to protect yourself from those oily aerosols as well. The N series of masks offer no protection against the oil aerosols. They're not resistant to oil. N stands for not resistant to oil. R stands for somewhat resistant to oil. It can filter off the oily aerosol particles up to a certain extent. And the P series are the ones that are oil proof, that do not allow any oil aerosols to pass through. Now, this is purely from an occupational setup. If you're working in an occupational setup where a lot of oil aerosols particles are generated, you need to wear the P series of mask or the R series of masks. Where there are no oily particles generated, you need to wear the N series of masks. Now, within the N series, there is something called as N95. N95 means that this particular mask can filter off 95% of any particle which is more than 0.3 microns in size. So the filtration efficacy of 95% for a particle more than 0.3 microns is called as an N95 mask. N99, 99% efficiency, N100, 100% efficiency. I'm going to be focusing only on N95 for a simple reason that is the most important mask that is used in the COVID-19 pandemic. You don't need the N99, you don't need the N100 for simple reasons that they are very difficult to breathe. They're very efficient filters, but you wear it and you try to breathe through it. It is not easy at all. And therefore N99, N100 out. The R series and the P series are out because the virus has got nothing to do with oil aerosols. So we're going to focus only on N95. Now the N95 masks are available in three forms. You have the molded non-foldable mask with no valve. Then you have the molded non-foldable mask with a valve. And then you have the foldable N95 mask with a valve. If I give you a choice to pick up any one of these from the store, and I tell you that all the three of them cost the same price, which one are you more likely to buy out of the three? I'm sure you're more likely to buy the middle one, the one with the valve, because it looks a little sophisticated, it looks a little chic, and it looks as if, oh, this must be a better mask than the remaining two. The valve is meant for breathing out very easily. And it was designed only for occupational setups where there's a lot of dust and smoke, where you have to wear a very tight mask. You do not want the dust to enter inside your lungs, but at the same time, you want to remove the air very easily out of your lungs. And therefore you have the valve over here. The reason why I'm telling you this is the valved N95 mask should not be worn in the COVID-19 pandemic, especially for people who are wearing it in the community, because the valve allows all the viruses to come out through the valve and you can infect other people. I see a lot of people on the television, the journalists, the politicians, everybody wearing a valved N95 mask. It is the wrong mask to wear during the COVID-19 pandemic. Who should wear a valved mask? Only a doctor who is working in the intensive care unit. He has to sit in the intensive care for 6 to 8 hours wearing that very tight-fitting mask, which is not easy to breathe. He is the one who requires the valved N95 mask so that his breathing can become a lot easier. And as it is, he's in an area where there are people suffering from COVID-19. So there's no question of transmitting infection over there. But outside in the community, you should not wear the valved N95 mask. The N95 mask also is made up of 3 layers, very efficient filtration. The problem with the N95 mask is it has to be worn very, very tightly. If you do not wear it tightly, you cannot protect yourself from the COVID-19 virus. And because you have to wear it so tightly, you can see the impact that it creates on people who wear it. So this is a nurse who just finished her 8-hour duty in the ICU, wearing a very tight N95 fitting mask. And you can see the abrasions that it created on her face. That is the price that you have to pay if you have to wear the N95 mask correctly. If you do not wear it correctly, you leave it loose for all the air to pass from all the sides, it is not going to offer you any protection. So the N95 mask has got two challenges. One is very tight to wear and therefore the skin becomes abraded. And second is, it is not easy to breathe through the N95 mask. You try it. You try the surgical mask and you try the N95 mask. The N95 mask is difficult to breathe. And especially if you're an asthmatic person or if you have underlying heart disease, you are going to find it more difficult to breathe through the N95 mask. I'm going to skip this because the equivalent to N95 for a European mask is the FFP2, the face mask. But I'm not going to cover that over here because we largely don't use it. One of the messages that I wanted to convey was a lot of people are selling fake N95 masks. Doctors don't know it, nurses don't know it, the healthcare officials don't know it. They bought the N95 mask because there's a label saying N95 mask. Most of these are not N95 masks. They are fake masks. Just because of the shortages of these masks, there are many people who have taken advantage of that, who created N95 looking masks and they have labeled them as N95 masks. And that really saddens me because, imagine a doctor doing a duty in the ICU, given an N95 mask, which is a fake mask. Obviously, it is going to have poor efficiency in terms of protection from the COVID-19 virus. So how do you recognize an N95 mask? There is a website that explains you how to understand whether your N95 mask is genuine or whether it is a fake mask. And I'm going to let you to have a look at this later on. Can the N95 mask be reused? Not easily available. So what do? I mean, you have to protect yourself. So let me just take you through this very quickly. They should be worn only once, ideally. If they're spoiled or if they're damaged or if they're wet, you throw them away. You don't wear them at all. They should never be shared. Your N95 mask is always your N95 mask. Never share it with anybody else. People have been trying to do something to, reuse the N95 mask. Microwaving spoils the filter. Ultraviolet radiation spoils the filtration capacity. Autoclaving and alcohol sterilization. They should not be, they're not recommended for the N95 mask. Some people spray the 70% alcohol on the N95 mask with the belief that they can wear it the next day again. The alcohol actually spoils the filtration, the fibers that are responsible for the filtration, and therefore they should not be recommended. So what works actually? You need to have at least 4 masks. 1, 2, 3, 4. You wear the mask number 1 today. After the end of the day, you remove it very carefully, put it in a paper bag, leave it open for 3 days. It takes 3 days for the virus to dry off and die. And on the 4th day is when you repeat using the mask number 1. And you keep on doing that with the subsequent. So repeating the masks, keeping them dried for 3 days is one way of reusing the mask, but you need to have at least 4 N95 masks for that. There is some suggestion that you can heat it in an oven, 70 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. It takes 30 minutes to get rid of the virus. Dry heat in a rice cooker is another method that has been recommended. And some people have also recommended chemical sterilization with H2O2. So there are different ways in which you can reuse the N95 mask. A single layer face mask should not be used for the COVID-19 pandemic at all. It does not offer any protection, and it does not even prevent the virus from going out of your own mouth. So a single layer mask should not be worn. Be careful. I've seen a lot of people outside in the community buy a single layer face mask and they believe it works. It doesn't work at all. It is to be used only for food processing industry. Similarly, the dust mask, it's a flexible paper pad that is just, it's got a mold, and you just have a single strip at the back. Uh, it is meant only for large dust particles. It cannot filter off the bacteria or the viruses at all. I have seen so many people in the community wear a dust mask. This is not to be allowed in the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, it is only meant for protection from dust, large particles, not the small particles. The scientific advisor to the Prime Minister of India made a very important announcement on the 30th of March 2020. Every single person in our country must wear a mask. N95 to be used only for doctors and nurses. Surgical masks to be used by doctors. And in the community, everybody should wear a cloth mask. They also released a full document on how to make a cloth mask. And it's a beautiful document that I would recommend all of you all to go through. Now, this is a very, very important and interesting initiative taken by the government of India, because I believe that this one single intervention has significantly reduced the spread of the COVID-19 virus in our country. Now, when this advisory was made available on the 30th of March, there was not enough knowledge about which fabric should be used to make the cloth mask, because there are so many different types of fabric. A few weeks ago, a very interesting paper was published by the School of Molecular Engineering from the University of Chicago. And they went on to do a very, very, very comprehensive research on which fabric is the most protective, which fabric filters of the virus more efficiently than the other fabrics. So they compared the cotton fabric versus the silk fabric versus chiffon, flannel, the synthetic fabrics, and then the combination of all these different types of fabrics. Very, very interesting. And then they gave their report in two columns: more than 300 nanometers and less than 300 nanometers. But we're going to focus on less than 300 nanometers because the size of the COVID-19 virus is about 120 nanometers. So anything less than 300 nanometers would also filter off the COVID-19 virus. So let's focus only on that. A very large experiment, and they really did a very, very good job out of it. And to cut the long story short, just let me show you the tables over here. So here are the regular masks, the N95 and the surgical mask. No gap means it is worn correctly. There's no gap at all. It's worn correctly. There's no leakage from any side. So an N95 mask for particles which are less than 300 nanometers, the efficiency is 85%. For more than 300 nanometers, it is 99.9%. Now, if you wear the N95 mask improperly with leaving gaps from the side, then the filtration efficacy reduces from 85% to almost 35%. And for the particles which are more than 300 nanometers, from 99.9% to 12%. The surgical mask, if it is worn properly, efficiency is 76%. And if you do not wear it properly, the efficiency is 50%. Now, what I want to point out over here is there's not much difference between the N95 mask and the surgical mask. 85, 75 is this little difference between the two types of masks. Now, what about the fabric masks that they compared these standard routine masks with? And here is the answer that actually surprised me and surprised a lot of people. Less than 300 nanometers. Cotton quilt has an efficiency of 96%. Better than the N95 mask, better than the surgical mask. The cotton with 80 threads per inch. Now, this is a very loose cotton, only 80 threads in 1 square inch. The efficiency of filtration is only 9%. So if you use a poor quality cotton fabric, then the filtration efficiency is very, very poor, less than 10%. Even if you take 2 layers of that, you can increase it to up to 40%, but nothing more than that. On the other hand, if you take a 600 threads per inch, a good quality cotton fabric, then the filtration efficacy is around 80%. And whether you take 2 layers, it doesn't make much difference. Flannel is around 57%. Chiffon, 1 layer is 67%, 2 layers is 83%. Natural silk is 55, 1 layer, and 2 layers is 65. So these are the filtration efficacy of different types of fabrics. What it tells me is the cotton quilt and the cotton 600 TPI are the ones that offer good protection, and chiffon is also not bad. But more interesting than that is what is written at the bottom over here. If you take a combination of fibers of fabric, so cotton plus chiffon, 97%, cotton plus flannel, 95%, cotton plus silk, if worn correctly, no gap, 94%. And if you do not wear it properly, then it comes down to 37%. What does this tell you? I think it reassures a lot of us people, saying that you don't need to have an N95 mask in the community. You don't need to have a surgical mask. You need to have good quality cotton fabric masks. And what would be an ideal cotton fabric mask? So if you look at the combination, have a cotton layer, one cotton layer, one on the inside, one on the outside, and have a chiffon layer in the middle, or have a silk layer in the middle, or have a flannel layer in the middle. So do 2 good quality cotton fibers with a chiffon layer is perhaps better than an N95 mask to protect yourself from the COVID-19 virus. And this came as a bit of a surprise, that even simple things that we possess in our home also have the ability to filter off these viruses. So how does the combination work? Why does chiffon and cotton be better than cotton alone or chiffon alone? I think there's some electrical charge that the chiffon generates, and that this electrical charge is the one that attracts small sized, nanometer sized particles and therefore filters it off. That's what many people think. This was my last slide actually, because a lot of people are making their own masks at home, a cotton quilt mask or a cotton chiffon mask. You don't need to buy an N95 mask in this COVID-19 pandemic. These cotton masks are as good. And this is what you as doctors must recommend to all your patients. Every patient who comes to your clinic must be asked to wear a mask, compulsory, because that is the only way you can protect yourself. So I'm going to end my presentation by, just making this very simple statement. Even a simple thing like a mask has a story to tell and teach. How the evolution of mask happened. Why did the surgeons start wearing a mask? How the Manchurian pandemic actually, was the first time when people started wearing a mask to protect themselves, and the potential to save millions of lives. If you look at the mathematical modeling exercises that I presented to you, even if 50% of the people in the community wear a mask most of the time, you can flatten the curve of the COVID-19 pandemic within no time. I think that's the potential and the power of wearing a mask. So it's time that, we start taking the mask a little more seriously, because that is the only thing that we have at our hand to do something about the COVID-19 pandemic. We don't have effective drugs. We don't have vaccines. So the only thing that we can do is we can protect ourselves. A mask performs 2 important functions. It prevents the spread of the virus to the other people, one, which is more important. And the second is it prevents yourself from catching the infection from others. Both actions are very important, but the first one of preventing the spread, I think, is the one that actually has the biggest power. So carry home message, everybody should wear a mask, and it is a doctor who must convince the people in the community about wearing masks and explaining to them that you don't need to wear an N95 mask, wear a cotton quilt mask or a cotton chiffon mask, and that's as good as the N95 mask. So I'm going to stop over here. I'm sorry if I spoke for a little longer than what I should, but I thought it was important to share this knowledge with everybody.